Welcome to the JFK Assassination, Do the Math Part 2. In this episode, I'll begin the proof of where the bullet came from that struck Governor Connally, and by doing so, prove that the sounds on the Dallas Police Department's dictabelt are the sounds of the rifle shots during the assassination. This will also be the beginning of the debunking of the single bullet theory. Now, before I begin this segment, I must give Dr. D.B. Thomas complete credit for my being able to prove the dictabelt recordings were the actual sounds of the shots during the assassination. In his brilliant work published in Hear No Evil in 2001, not only did he present proof that the acoustical data recorded came from the rifle shots, but he demonstrated the concept that the open microphone was traveling with the motorcade. As you will see, that is key. Let's begin. Now, the biggest problem with finding the street location of where the bullet struck Governor Connally is that there is no clear, indisputable photographic evidence to show us where the limousine was when the bullet struck. But fortunately, there was clear acoustical evidence. Granted that this acoustical evidence has been treated as controversial, but by doing the math, I will end the controversy and find where the limousine was when the shot struck Governor Connally. So, let's do the math. First, we're going to assume that it was shot number 2 that struck the governor, and both shots 2 and 3 came from behind the motorcade. Dr. D.B. Thomas stated in his paper that the recorded time between these shots is 4.8 seconds. If this is true, all we have to do to find the correct frame on the Zapruder film is multiply the length of times between shots, which is 4.8 seconds, times the number of frames per second that the camera could record, which is 18.3. And that will give us the number of frames between the two shots, which is 87.84. You interpret the number this way. 87 is the number of exposed frames, and the 0.84 represents the partial exposure of the 88th frame. Next, we subtract that from the number 313, the frame number where the third shot struck the president. The resulting number is 225.16. This means that frame 225 was finished being exposed, and frame 226 was being exposed when the shot struck. Since frame 226 was being exposed when the bullet struck, let's check this frame to see if it shows evidence of the shot striking the governor. And we find nothing. Is this the moment of oops? Is this where my theory falls apart? No, actually this is the moment of proof. You see, there are reasons one can't just use the time between the shots as recorded in this case. The first is because the motorcade moved forward during the time between the shots. The second is the sound was recorded by an open microphone that was moving with the motorcade as proposed by Dr. Thomas. And the third is the additional distance traveled by the motorcade was enough for one or more frames to be exposed before the sound of the third shot reached the microphone. And that's why there's no film evidence of the second shot at frame 226. So what's the correct frame number? Here's the math. In the 4.8 seconds between shots 2 and 3, the motorcade, which was traveling at 11.2 miles per hour, or 16.4 feet per second, moved 78.816 feet further away from where the limousine was when shot 2 was fired. In order to find out how much additional time it took for the sound to travel the additional 78.816 feet, one must divide the feet traveled by the speed of sound, which is 1,126.4 feet per second. And the answer is 0.069972 extra seconds. Now, this may not seem like enough time to affect anything, but it's more than enough. You see, the camera is exposing 18.3 frames of film per second. That means that one frame of film is exposed for every 0.054645 seconds. So if you divide the 0.069972 extra seconds by the film rate of 0.054645 seconds, you get 1.28043 additional frames exposed in the extra time it took the sound to travel to the microphone. And that's why there's no visual evidence of a bullet striking the governor at frame 226. It couldn't be the correct frame. To find the correct frame number, just add the additional 1.28043 frames to the 225, and we get 226.28043. This means that frame 226 had been exposed, and frame 227 was being exposed when the bullet hit and passed through Governor Connally. There should be at least some visual evidence of the shot hitting Governor Connally in frame 227 to confirm this. So let's look at the film again. Frame 226 is normal as it should be. However, frame 227 is significantly different. While there is some blurring from a shift in the handheld camera, there is much more blurring to Governor Connally. Additionally, his right shoulder has dropped, his head is turned more to the right. This is expected involuntary movement for someone that has just been hit by a large caliber, high velocity bullet in the back. The next frame, 228, shows a normal scene with two exceptions. 1. Governor Connally's head has turned back to its original position, which is consistent with an earlier sudden forceful jolt. And 2. His right shoulder is still drooping below the position it was in frame 226, which is consistent with the wound. And finally, film analysis has shown that the governor flips his hat up and down rapidly with his right arm from frame 227 through 229, all of which are expected movements following the jolt of a shot striking someone in the back right side and exiting the right front side of his chest. Now, these items have been noted by many, most attributing them to a delayed reaction of a shot hitting the governor earlier than frame 227. But the noted physical aspects of the bullet hitting the governor in the back and passing through his chest are not voluntary and cannot be delayed. The only other movement noted by others during this time is from frame 224, when the governor's right suit lapel popped up and down once, and that can be explained by the ordinary body movement when the governor was repositioning himself. Remember that Mr. Myers noted that in frame 223 that the governor's shoulders were at 37 degrees to the back of his seat because the governor had turned to look back at the president following the sound of the first shot, and he continued to turn back around through frame 226. Given the noted physical facts, there is sufficient evidence to confirm frame 227 was in fact the frame in which the bullet struck Governor Connally. But this isn't all the information to be garnered from those frames. They're part of the single bullet theory, and that means that if a bullet went through Governor Connally between frames 223 and 224, it first had to go through the president's neck. Look at frame 224. Notice the president's left arm. One can clearly see the white cuff. Notice that the position of his left arm never changes all the way through frame 228. Why? Because the president put his hand over the wound where an earlier bullet had cut his trachea in two, and that opened a hole in his throat just like a tracheotomy. If he didn't keep his hand there, he had no sensation of breathing because you feel that through your nose and mouth. If he had raised his arm to his throat after a bullet strike between frames 223 and 224, his left arm would have been blurred in frame 224. Now look at Jackie Kennedy. She has a fixed stare on her husband from the time her face appears from behind the sign in frame 221 and never takes her eyes off of him until after the fatal headshot. Had the bullet struck her husband between frames 223 and 224 while she was staring at him, she would have reacted. Her fixed stare, which can be traced back to around frame 204 by the position of her hat, is one of the reasons the House Subcommittee on Assassination stated that the first shot occurred sometime between frames 204 through 208 inclusive. One can conclude that the shot that struck the president occurred long before frame 223, and that the governor was struck by a different bullet during the exposure of frame 227. And this conclusion includes and matches the sound, the film, and the physical wound evidence. And that takes us to part 3, when I'll do the math that completely debunks the single bullet theory. Thanks for watching.